CRO-AM Connections, connecting with Croatian Americans through conversation and events to share our culture. Today on our show, we have Frank Sinkwich III and Todd Leckie to share stories about their grandfather, Frank Sinkwich, a great football player in both the collegiate and professional levels from Athens, Georgia. Thank you all for joining us today. Dobro nam došli. Today we're having a conversation with Frank Sinkwich III and Todd Leckie to share stories about their grandfather, Frank Sinkwich, a great football player in both the collegiate and professional levels. Just want to say welcome, Frank and Todd. Really looking forward to this conversation with you guys.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So your grandfather was recently inducted into the Croatian American Sports Hall of Fame, and that's how we met you, Frank. You were unable to attend, so I think it was the last minute we helped you pull an acceptance speech together. And I got to tell you, it went over really well. You did a great job, and I think the crowd really enjoyed, all the attendees there really enjoyed that acceptance speech that you gave. But during that recording time, we felt you had a lot of stories to tell, and it's like we didn't give you a lot of time to do that. And so we reconnected with you, and you're like, hey, my cousin Todd knows some stories too. So that's why we're here tonight, to see if we can get some more of those stories out of you. And here are some of the other ones that you shared during your acceptance speech on behalf of your grandfather too. So how we do this, just to lay out the program for first-time listeners, is there are typically three parts to the show. The first part is all about talking about your Croatian roots, your family heritage, as much as you know, and that's, some people know more, some people know less, and that's all good. The second part is really focusing on your grandfather's football days, and if you can share any stories, and maybe stories not pertaining to football, any family stories that you want to share, or we'll say that's free game if you so choose to do that. And then the last part is just getting your final thoughts on his induction into the Croatian American Sports Hall of Fame, and any other thoughts you may want to share about that event. So let's dive in. Who wants to take it first about his and yours family roots?
Well, let me start by saying thank you for having me again on the program, and thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to film the acceptance speech. Again, I'm sorry I could not attend that, but it did mean a lot to me for you guys to recognize him, and I know it means a lot to the rest of our family. And yeah, when we were doing the interview for the acceptance speech, I did have a speech prepared, but as I was going through the speech, I just had all these other memories keep popping up in my head. So that's why it took a couple of takes.
We could tell.
Yeah, but literally a flood of memories just came back. So thanks for being patient with me about that. But thanks for allowing us to share these memories at this time.
Yeah. So where was he born, here or in Croatia? Do you guys?
So he was actually born in Croatia, and the proof of that is in a vault where I have his original passport, and it says country of birth, or nation of birth, Yugoslavia. So that's been verified. Nice.
Yeah, in a vault. I like that. It's in the vault too, right?
Were visiting there. They had immigrated. His father was named Ignatius, and his mother Veronica. They went back, or actually his mother went back. He was born there, and was stuck there for a period of time after being born before he came back over here. So his father was a steel worker when he came over, had really big arms. I remember his dad when I was a little kid. He was still alive. Lived in Youngstown as a steel worker, and ultimately ended up opening his own restaurant and bar called The Place. So
nice. Did they serve ethnic food, Croatian food, or was it? Do you know what they did in the restaurant? Or
Quite honestly, I can't tell you exactly what type of food they served. I think they had food, beer, and wine. I know that much. So.
Probably some good Schlevo too. I bet back in the day.
Probably did have a Croatian slant to a few dishes.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something interesting is that, the story that was passed down to us was that, our great grandparents came over to America to explore the new country and then went back to get the rest of the family. And that's when they came back and got my grandfather. So there were 2 trips made. But I remember several years ago watching the movie Hitch. And it's when Will Smith takes his girlfriend to Ellis Island, and they look up the passengers from all the immigration ships back in the 19 teens. So I got the bright idea to do that myself, and I actually found the ship's manifest that had my grandmother's name and my 2 aunts' names on it. I can't remember if my grandfather was on there or not. I'm sure he was, but I have that somewhere, and I tried to find it earlier, but we just, like I told you, we just moved, so I can't place it. But I actually have the ship's manifest from where they came over.
That's pretty cool. Now, you in one of your references, you said you heard stories about the name spelling. And so curious, how was it spelled in the manifest?
I believe it was Sinkovich. And there was also a newspaper article back in the 40s about my grandfather referencing the fact that he had changed his name from Sinkwich to Sinkwich. And he explicitly said he wanted to Americanize his name because, as I told you in the acceptance speech, he was very proud of becoming an American. Yeah. And, he also was keenly aware of what was going on in Europe at the time with the spread of communism and the Nazis and so forth. So he wanted to distance himself from that aspect.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's not uncommon to hear that. Yeah.
And you also have to remember when you think about that, it wasn't just the Jewish population that was being persecuted; it was the Slavic population as well.
Yeah, so right about that.
A lot of people may have changed their names for that reason. But my dad, I would always ask my dad what was the original spelling, and I've heard several different variations, and most of them are Sinkovic and then Sinkovich. But I think I said this in one of the takes from the clip from the acceptance speech, but I would always ask my dad, what was how was our name really spelled? And he would tell me a different version every single time. There's probably like 10 different versions. And then when my great grandmother Veronica passed away, and we went to Youngstown and went to the cemetery, my dad wasn't lying to me. There was all these different versions of the last name Sinkwich on the tombstones, all our relatives.
Actually, that's where I learned about it as well. And so he's right. I always thought it was Sinkovic, and that was one of the versions. So,
yep.
Yeah, that's funny. Now, did you guys travel to Youngstown? Do you remember any, like when you guys were younger? Do you remember any times going back? And did he speak Croatian at all, or did they speak it in the house? Do you remember any of that?
His parents spoke Croatian fluently and spoke it in the house. I think his sisters, not so much that I can ever recall them speaking Croatian, and I don't ever recall my granddad speaking Croatian. My mom spoke a little bit. As far as the family, his parents talked back and forth, and my mom tells a story about when she was a little girl. Actually, his grandmother from Croatia lived there. They called her Mojk, and she didn't speak English. She only spoke Croatian. So when she's thinking in terms of her grandmother from that side, she was fluent in Croatian. That's all she spoke. And so to speak with her, you had to, speak with her in Croatian. So I actually learned a few words from my mom, from that time period where she learned Croatian.
Oh, interesting.
And I remember I went to Youngstown a couple of times, maybe 3 times. Once when I was really young, and then once I believe I was in 8th grade when Cheney High School, where my grandfather played high school football, they had a dedication for him. I can't remember exactly what they were dedicating, but I remember going with my grandfather to Youngstown at that time. And then I remember going with him when my great grandmother Veronica passed away, and that's when we saw all the different tombstones. But I always thought it was interesting going up there. I loved it as a little kid because, growing up down here in the South, we have our own culture down here, and going up to Youngstown, Ohio. Not only did you have that just, perspective on a different part of the United States, but then you had, your own relatives who but never see, but they're your relatives, and they're actually speaking a different language. And I remember my great grandmother speaking more Croatian than English to us. And then, as I mentioned, also going to the, what do we call it, Todd? The Croatian house or the Croatian home?
Croatian home, in Youngstown.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
there wasn't a visit that you would go see them that you wouldn't end up at the Croatian home. And I remember the food was outstanding. But it was a daily ritual for them. They went there every day. That was their source of entertainment.
And it was a treat for us.
It was absolutely a treat.
And I'll tell you one really neat story
Yeah.
that I remember that I haven't told you guys yet. And Todd, I think you were with us. Weren't you with us when we went to Washington D.C. And met President Reagan with my dad?
No, I wasn't in on that trip, but I heard all about it.
Okay, well, sorry, but
Yeah,
that was I believe I was in 8th grade at the time. Ronald Reagan was president, I believe, and Senator Pete Dawkins, I believe he was from New Jersey. He had won the Heisman Trophy as well, and one of his campaign strategies was getting several of the Heisman Trophy winners together. And I don't remember why they were getting together, but I remember being with my grandfather and my dad and meeting like 8 different Heisman Trophy winners all in the same room.
Wow.
And then we were actually taken to the White House, and we were given a tour of the White House, and then each Heisman Trophy winner got their own personal visit to the Oval Office. And so I have a picture of my grandfather and Ronald Reagan shaking hands, and it's signed by my grandfather. So that's
really cool.
Yeah,
He's
cool. I've seen the picture, and
Have you?
and he gave firsthand an account of his trip. He said it was awesome, and meeting Reagan, he was just over the moon. You could tell by the look on his face too. When he's meeting Reagan, he was truly happy to, for that trip.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So he was a 3-sport athlete, if I get this right? He played football, basketball, and track. Is that correct? In high school? Yeah. In high school.
In high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then, go ahead, Todd.
He was well known for football in the region, but how he ended up in Georgia is, Wally Butts was, looking for another individual when he came to that region. He was in Youngstown at a gas station, and, from Georgia, people were talking to him, "Hey, what are you doing up here from Georgia?" And he's like, "I'm looking for an athlete. I'm with the University of Georgia." And they're like, "Well, you need to go see Frank Sinkwich. He's the best athlete in Youngstown." And he wasn't on Wally Butts' radar whatsoever. And so, as it turns out, after talking to this guy at the gas station, he looked him up, found out about him. One thing led to another. That's how he ended up in the University of Georgia. It was really an accident. It was unplanned. It was a coincidence.
Right.
And then talking with my granddad, had he have not gone to Georgia, his plan was to go to Notre Dame. That's where he was.
Oh, wow. Wow.
See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
So it was just kismet, right? It's just somebody showed up at the right time and started talking, right?
And, with that decision, we all grew up in Georgia. So, that's where the southern branch of the family, started.
Yeah.
By coincidence from that one meeting.
Let's talk about his Georgia days. He played all 4 years, right?
Yeah. Back in the day, JV lasted 2 years. So it was, the JV team, and then you became varsity and, for your junior and senior year. And when he came in for the JV team was literally just blowing out every other SEC JV team. They call them the point-a-minute bullpups, because they literally, every time they got the ball, they scored. So people were really excited for when that team, him especially, became a junior. And, and he really made a name for himself after that. So.
Yeah, I think I read that freshman year they went undefeated, and then didn't like his sophomore year he was named to the All Southern. I think it was All Southern first team by the UPI or something like that. Like Every
Probably
year
his
he made an
junior
impact.
year, because literally the way it was is it was JV, and then you became varsity your junior year. So he may have been a rising junior to be like an All-American, but I know that there was accolades for, the JV work, because literally they'd beat people like 70 something to, 3. I mean, they'd just destroy them.
Yeah.
And back then the teams went both ways. So, he played on the defense as well as offense. So.
Yeah, there's no, you're just one-sided today. And then his I mean, I hate to call this a breakout year, but his junior year, he just like exploded, right?
Absolutely.
And you guys have a story about, we saw a pic of it. He broke his jaw that year, right?
Correct. That was his Heisman moment, was participating in the Orange Bowl with a broken jaw. And I mean, you have to stop a minute and think about that, because I've done that, several times. Number one, it's hard enough to play with any broken bone, but something in your face, your jaw, that's got to be tremendously painful. But then think about the nourishment aspect of that. You can only eat
Right.
What you can drink, basically.
Through a straw,
So
yeah.
you got to be that much tougher, even.
That's nuts. But he had he set, I think I read the SEC rushing record that year with a broken jaw. And he had passing yards, which I think he set the total offensive record that year too.
He did. There's still an Orange Bowl record that still stands that he has, with broken jaw from that time period. So
that's crazy.
Which that's saying a lot. That was 80 years ago. So.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what's interesting too is when, I guess it was the 1942 season when they went to the 1943 Rose Bowl, and then I guess, when was it? The 2018 season, that when my son was a freshman and he was a walk-on, and both teams went to the Rose Bowl, and I believe both teams only had one loss, and I think each loss was to Auburn, and in 2018 those schools known as Auburn, and then I believe back then it was like Alabama Polytech or something like that, and it may have not been the exact same school, but both teams, we lost to an Alabama team. But I guess my point is, I heard the story that the only reason they lost that game during the 1942 season is because they all got cocky and went out drinking the night before that game, and that's how and why they lost that game. Now that could just be lore and legend, but it's it's a good story.
Yeah, we'll take it. That's a good story.
Leads to the next story. He liked to have a good time. So there was instances where, there's one article that I saw, and you may have seen this article. It's like, Sinkwich quits football to enjoy college experience. So somewhere in the middle of there, he decided that, this is way too much work, and I'd rather just enjoy my college experience. So it was a brief period of time, but he quit football to enjoy himself, and then they pulled him back, and that was over. Another rule that they had, Wally Butts had, is you can't be married, be a Georgia football player. And so what did he do? He married our grandmother. And they changed that rule, so.
I'm sure I forgot about that too. Yeah.
That's fabulous.
Actually, some of the best footage I've seen, and I think you may have sent it to me, Frank, is, their trip to the Rose Bowl. Back then, you didn't fly on a plane. They didn't have Delta, so you rode the train. And so he rode the train all the way from Georgia to, California. And my grandmother made the trip. And so there was some footage of him with all his buddies, and also footage with him with my grandmother. It was, really amazing. And it was all color footage. So, I mean, it's just like, looking into the past, it was incredible footage. And I think you probably still have that, Frank. I don't know if you do or not.
Yeah, so that was, so like I said, when UGA went back to the Rose Bowl, and I guess it was 18, the university published some of their videos from the archives, and there was a lot of never before seen color footage, and of the train ride, and then also of the football team, the football players getting to meet individual celebrities. So I know there's film with him and Ginger Rogers.
Wow.
There's pics of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire in the team, and there's one scene of my grandfather and Ginger Rogers talking, and I could tell my grandfather was nervous because he was like picking his thumbs. But it's the crazy thing is the way he was holding himself and his mannerisms. My daughter has the exact same mannerisms. So, I mean, it was just crazy. The family traits are very curious, I guess.
Yeah, got to be genetic.
Yeah, but also that color footage has some really good footage of the actual Rose Bowl game and the fans in the stadium before the game. And I've always been told that my grandfather was a huge celebrity back in the 40s, back in his time, and everybody knew who he was and so forth, and he was a national celebrity. But when you go back and you see that film footage, there's footage of the spectators in the stands holding up signs spelling out his name. Just like they do today in stadiums around the world, if you will. But this was back in 1942 in Pasadena.
Wow, that's incredible that you guys have that footage as a family memento. I mean, that's really cool. Yeah. So his year, I mean, that was a tremendous year because, like you said, they beat UCLA. They won the Rose Bowl, but that's his Heisman year, right? He won.
Yeah, 42.
Correct.
And the Rose Bowl was January of 43 to cap it all off for the national championship. Right. So, he had just won the Heisman. And actually, he's the first winner in the SEC. So, SEC football as a conference is relatively famous these days. But if you think all the way back then, he was the first Heisman winner from the Southeastern Conference and the first from Georgia. So pretty much put Georgia on the map as a football, the beginning of a football powerhouse way back then.
That's crazy to think of it that way because, SEC is huge nowadays. I mean, and it has a lot of history, and he was the first. That's pretty cool.
With all the fame and, all of that goes with him, he was an extremely humble man. So when I was a little kid, I had no idea he was famous. People would come up, and they would, fawn over him because he was famous, but you just never see it because he was so humble and, apt to do things himself. Didn't like people waiting on him and stuff like that. He was just, pretty simple and humble man was my remembrance of him. And Frank, I'm sure you remember the same,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I remember his house over in Homewood Hills in Athens, and this house had this nice big basement. And I remember at the time it was unfurnished, and he had all of his trophies and just memorabilia scattered all over the floor. And in the corner was the Heisman Trophy, just tucked away in a corner. And I remember being a little boy and going in that room and rummaging around. And I actually, for the longest time, thought, I want to say it's the SEC Most Valuable Player Trophy. I thought that was the Heisman Trophy because that was in a more prominent spot in the basement, and it actually had two people, in the, the trophy was comprised of two figures. Oh. So I thought that was the Heisman when I was little. Then I came to realize that the Heisman was tucked away on purpose so it wouldn't get, hurt, but it was still shoved over in the corner.
With that, it was kept in the corner. And another tidbit about him is that he decided that he was going to donate his Heisman back to the school because back in the day they'd give you one Heisman, and he's like, the school really deserves this Heisman. And he thought of it in the sense that he was a great football player, but really his team earned it. That was his mindset. Uh-huh. And so he donated the Heisman back to the school. The Heisman committee found out about that and provided him a Heisman back, and from that day on, the Heisman committee always gave a Heisman to the player in the school. So he's the guy that started that.
Wow. That is really neat. That is a really neat story. So, but there's another piece that you shared, Frank, how he received the Heisman, right? Wasn't he in the military?
Right. So I'm not sure exactly how the story went, the timeline of it, but I know he enlisted in the Marines and went through boot camp at Parris Island and was allowed to accept the Heisman Trophy in his dress blues in New York. And when he accepted the Heisman, he was presented the actual trophy, was able to hold it and take pictures with it, but he was not awarded the trophy because it was during wartime and all the medals were being rationed and reserved for the military. So he was presented with the award, but was not actually it wasn't given to him at the time.
Yeah.
Todd, maybe you can elaborate on the Marine. I don't know if you can elaborate on the timeline, because I was kind of always confused by that. But
Yeah, everything you said is true. That he, was in the Marines, did address blues, and he, to my knowledge, is the only Heisman winner to ever accept, the trophy in military uniform. Ultimately, he didn't stay with the Marines. He ended up with the Army Air Corps, ultimately because he had flat feet. Okay, so you've got this athlete, the greatest athlete in America, awarded the Heisman Trophy, and they're like, well, you didn't pass the physical to remain a Marine because you've got flat feet. They called him Flatfoot Frankie. That was, one of his nicknames. But so he ended up with the Army Air Corps, and he ended up playing football for the Army Air Corps, and had some fame there as well.
And eventually blew his knees out in one of the games, and kind of ended his football career.
That ended his football career. In between, I guess, the Marines and all that, he did have a professional career, and he was NFL's Rookie of the Year with the Detroit Lions. So he did have, a couple great years, playing professional football as well.
And you said nicknames. He had a couple nicknames, right?
Right. Fireball Frankie because of his speed, Flatfoot Frankie because of his flat feet. And then I don't remember how and when, but the Croatian Crusher was one of the names. And I've actually seen that in print somewhere, but I cannot find it to this day. But I know I did not make that up, but referred to as the Croatian
Oh, that's hysterical. He also, I think that his Heisman, correct me if I'm wrong, I think his Heisman year, wasn't he also voted the #1 athlete of the year by the AP over, I think, Ted Williams?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that was 1943. He was athlete of the year, and that was Ted Williams' greatest year, and he exceeded him as far as being voted athlete of the year. So quite an accomplishment.
I got to ask this: ever feel any pressure on you guys? I mean, that's a high bar of a man to like try to achieve. I mean.
Yeah, I gave up on the football portion of it a long time ago. but yeah, I mean, honestly, when you share the same name, and definitely, I feel. I don't really feel the pressure, but I feel the drive to get up and try to do the best at whatever, on any given day. But I'm gonna be human too. I'm gonna have a rest day here and there. But yeah, you definitely feel that you need to strive for excellence.
Yeah. Sounds like he put it in every day, right? His heart and soul in every day. He was a solid person all around. Yep. Any more stories you want to share about his football antics, maybe?
Well, I think going back to him. I have two to share. I think going back to his college days and quitting the football team. I think the quote was he needed more time for quote beer drinking than women was the actual quote.
Yeah, I didn't want to add that in, but now that you want to embellish on that, that was the exact headline.
No, you got to share that.
But I mean, he was a character. I mean, he was a typical.
I sugarcoated it by saying the college life, but
right. But he had some good quotes, and one of his other quotes was, how do you score so many? Like I can't remember. I don't know what the question was, but how do you score so many touchdowns? Let's say that was the question. Well, the quote was, "I run where they ain't." So he had some. He had his own little way of saying things, I guess.
Yeah, they call them isms, right? I think that's what they do. Isms.
And then I'll tell one more football story. And this is in revolving around his professional career. I got my hands on a video of one of his games. And I invited some of my buddies over to come watch it because this was brand new footage. I'd never seen this. I didn't even know what game it was. And it was colorized. And so we started watching this game, and my grandfather's number 21, but he's in a blue jersey. And I quickly realized, okay, he's playing for the Detroit Lions. And this is one of his early games. And I don't know what game it was, but I could not believe it because I swear he either threw 5 or 7 interceptions in that game. And I mean, and it was so embarrassing because I was like, I invited all my buddies over to come watch this, and here he is just throwing all these interceptions. And I was like, wow, I've never seen this. I wasn't aware of this one. But
yeah, I actually read some stuff. He started out really slow when he started his professional career, but after a couple games, he really got the swing of it, and he just dominated after that. So
became the MVP that's when he became MVP of the NFL, right?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
There was an article of, he's a bust. And that was only based on a couple games. And then after that, he figured it out. I guess, just like today is probably a faster game when you come out of college. Took him a couple games to get his legs under him. And then after that, he was dominant and MVP of the league. So, you obviously got one of those first couple games. And I read an article about that, and it was entertaining to read, considering where it ended up. So
exactly. That's why we can laugh about it now.
Absolutely.
No, he had a stellar career. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Do we want to go beyond his football career to extend, any family stories or what he did after his professional life in football?
Well, he was a very successful businessman. He came back to Athens. Before he actually started his own business, he coached a couple places. One, he was University of Tampa had a football team, so he was coached down there for a period of time, I think a year or two, and then came back to Athens and started a real small beer distributorship, and built it into a very large beer distributorship, which is still a family business. Really the roots behind that were his hard work, determination, and all of that really took it from something really small to, something large within his lifetime. And it's continued to thrive in the family, which, Frank now runs it. And, it's third generation. So, that business still lives on and will continue to live on. I live in San Antonio, so I worked in that business for many, many years, and now I'm in another business. But I tell you, just his drive, determination, and really just his old school mindset. When I have a bad day and you come into work and it's like, I've got a bad day and I really don't want to do this and I've got to deal with something I don't want to deal with, I stop and think about him and what he would say. And that guy, that drives me, because he wouldn't put up, he's a tough guy. If you got a problem, you hit it head on. And, so just the mindset that I learned from him kind of drives my business success. And I bet, Frank, you could say the same.
Yeah, you just never give up. No matter how bad it gets, you just keep going. That's how you win.
And I remember him telling me stories of, the beer business back in the day. Back in the day, he used to, he had one guy that worked with him, and he'd go on the truck. And he'd, leave in the morning, come back, it'd be night. And he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And he's like, I'll just do it one more day. He'd come back and then do it again. He'd get back late at night, and he's like, all right, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it one more day. And so one more day, just kept leading to one more day and one more day and one more day. And next thing you know, the business built.
There was a point in time, and I think you're talking about it, though, when they actually lived in the warehouse. They actually lived
He
there.
did. He said he slept in a cot in the warehouse, and that's what he was referencing.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
And he had a guy, Robert, who, would help him deliver beer, but they had one truck and two guys, and he was one of the two.
So it started off a company with, one company with two men. Now it's two companies with right around 550 people.
So there's a little bit of pressure on you, Frank.
Yeah, a little bit.
He's looking down at you and saying, hey, I ran with a broken jaw, buddy. Yeah.
Well, we've got a great team at both companies, and so it's nowhere near all me, but we work as a team.
No, that's a great legacy, and you guys should be definitely proud of your grandfather and everything you guys are doing to support his legacy and your family history. That's just awesome stuff.
Thank you.
I remember one story that goes back to the beer business. I just have to add this because it brought back memory for me. He's telling that story of him and Robert, the two guys on a beer truck out delivering. And there's an account, really a really old bar in a place called Eatonton, Georgia, and it's way out just in the boonies, right? And I was on a wine route back in the day, and I went in, and there's this really old guy in there, and he's like, your granddad used to come in here when he would drive the truck, and when he would come in here, he'd drink a Pabst Blue Ribbon. So when you come in here, you got to drink a Pabst Blue Ribbon with me. And so I drink a Pabst Blue Ribbon with this guy, and want to talk and talk. Well, I had a route to run. It's like I didn't have all the time to spend with this guy. But this guy had narcolepsy, so he'd be in the middle of the story, and all of a sudden he'd fall out of sleep, and halfway through the Pabst Blue Ribbon, then I could exit stage right. But that happened every time I would see him. He'd tell the same story, and then he'd fall asleep with his narcolepsy. But that added validation to what he was saying was true. He actually was on the truck at one point, and people still remembered.
Man. Hey, I don't want to stop you. If you got more stories, let's just keep rolling, because that's a great one. That's a great one. Any other final thoughts?
I tell you, it's amazing to me, winning the Heisman Trophy in 1942, people who still know his name. And this is a true story, but this happened about 5 years ago. I was actually on an elevator in Canada. I don't remember which city in Canada, but it was one of the, let's say it was Banff or Montreal or Quebec or wherever. But someone heard my name and said, Frank Sinkwich. There was a famous American football player named Frank Sinkwich. Wow. And I was like, yes, that was my grandfather back in 1942. How did you know? So it's just really interesting how many people still remember, his performances, his stats.
Yeah, he's a legend, man. He's a legend. You got to give him that credit. Why wouldn't they want to know, right? Why they should know, right? So, just final thoughts on the whole induction in the Croatian American Sports Hall of Fame, or just the Croatian heritage, or anything else you want to share as we wrap up?
Well, from my perspective, I know Frank gave the acceptance speech. I'm, very proud of that award for him, and really proud of my Croatian heritage, being his grandson. I mean, it means a lot to me, always has, and it does permeate through. I can remember, like I told you, stories of my mom, and then stories that she'd have of her grandmother. Years ago, visiting, his father, and Ignatius and Veronica, his parents, and their Croatian heritage permeated through everything they did. I mean, Croatian home was a huge part of their life, and so the work you're doing here really kind of brings it home for me, and makes me proud to be a Croatian as well. So I really appreciate the invite from my perspective, and it's been really great to share some stories, and really humbled and honored by his award.
Yeah. So Todd, I mean, being a couple of years older than me, you got to experience. We called my grandfather Grandpa. So Todd got to experience Grandpa, with more of the one-on-one conversations about my grandfather's life, where I just knew my grandfather as Grandpa. Kind of the old man who would come around. I didn't really ask him too much about football, or I just was so young at the time, I guess, or maybe I was scared to talk to him about it. I don't know, because he was such a figure, if you will. But I always remember him coming over it was every Sunday for dinner. He would come over, and I remember going to the garage door where he would come to and opening the screen door, and there he would be, just smiling, waiting to be invited in. He was just a humble man like that. Yeah. And then at Christmas time. What was really neat is at Christmas time, he'd give every one of his grandkids a brand new crisp $100 bill. And that meant the world. I mean, getting it from him was $100, was worth $100 itself. So you felt like you got $200 getting that $100 bill from him. And it was really special. Yeah. But a part we don't talk about that much, though, is Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, though, but I feel like Veronica's family had a lot of Slovenian roots too. Is that correct?
She talked in terms of she was Austrian, which Croatia was part of Austria-Hungary before World War I. Yeah, and so from my perspective, I was thinking that that's what she meant by that. It's hard to tell. I mean, that's a part that I lost. It may be Slovenian, but I know that she said that she was Austrian, but that was Austria-Hungary. Croatia was a part of Austria-Hungary. Yeah. So that's what I always thought that meant.
Right. And I remember looking on the map at some point, and I can't remember the little name of the little town where she was from, but I remember like at one point looking at a map, and in the two areas where the different families were from were so close together, but just on the opposite side of the border, if you will. But I mean, same exact place. There's just, an imaginary line drawn through it somewhere.
Right. Just like 20 miles apart, probably,
Yeah. Yeah.
They're close enough. They're close enough.
Very close.
Same part of the world for sure.
Close
And
enough.
I know my mom went back and actually stayed with some of the family. Ludwig was one of them. And, she visited
Really?
actual family in Croatia. I think it was back in the 70s, 80s, somewhere in there.
Huh.
And she had a few stories to tell. They were fun people, something to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always neat if you can get a chance to go back and find family. It's through these travels, these stories, everybody has a different story, and that connection is really neat to experience. So I'm glad she was able to get back there. Well, just want to really, really appreciate. This is why we do this, right? It's called CRO-AM Connections. It's about making connections, and if it wasn't for Frank saying, "Hey, we gotta get an acceptance speech right for the Sports Hall of Fame," if it wasn't for the Sports Hall of Fame, it wasn't for all these Croatian American athletes, right? We would have never met. You guys would be in Georgia. We'd be up in San Antonio in Georgia, and we'd be up in the PA, Maryland area. And this is really neat. This makes it fun for us to be able to meet other Croatian Americans and the legacies they leave behind. And your grandpa left a huge one. And you guys, like I said before, should be immensely proud of your family heritage and the contributions that he and you guys continue to give forward and beyond. So thank you for that, and appreciate you guys spending time with us tonight.
Well, thank you. This has been a lot to me personally, and it's been funny. You'll want to hear this because, growing up with the last name Sinkwich and your grandfather, and knowing you had these Croatian roots and so forth. And then, my grandfather passed away in 1990, and then my father passed away in 2010. So now, it's our generation, it's our time. And so you get that much more removed from your roots, right? And now with, modern technology, I several years ago, I participated in Ancestry.com and got my results back. I'm like, I'm hardly Croatian at all. All this other blood in me. But then, as that database populates, I become more Croatian, if you will. Yeah, but no, it's meant a lot to get back to this because you get busy, and we live in the South, so there's not many other, it's just people from our part of the world down here. So this has been great for me personally. So thank you for allowing us to do this.
Yeah. You'd be surprised. By starting this, we found folks. There's a lot of there's smaller groups, but in the Florida area, we find some in the Carolinas. You're the first Georgians we found, and there's actually a pretty decent contingent in Houston. I don't know about San Antonio, but we're starting to come out of the woodwork, and we're out there. It's these connections that help us find each other, and one day we'll be in Georgia and maybe knocking on your door, Frank, and being like, "Hey, can we take a pic with that trophy?"
Come on down.
That's a bucket list thing, I think, for us. So, again, really appreciate your time. You guys have been gracious, sharing stories about your grandpa, and really, truly thank you for all this experience that we've had with you. And so I'm going to wrap it up for us. This does wrap up another episode. So we want to say thank you, Punta Follow, to all of our CRO-AM followers for tuning in, and to Filthy 46 Productions for their editing and production expertise. So until next time, Živeli Hrvati, veliki pozdrav I Bog. Catch our next episode where we sit down for a conversation with Steve Rukavina, President of the National Federation of Croatian Americans Cultural Foundation, and Danica, CFU Lot 760 out of Philadelphia, PA. You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, and other podcast platforms, along with watching us on our YouTube channel or following us on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks and appreciation to Frank Sinkwich III and Todd Leckie for being our guests, Filthy 46 Productions, and as always, our CRO-AM followers.
Follow.